Introducing Oakley Meta Vanguard, the new performance AI glasses designed for athletes. With hands-free capture on an action-ready ultra-wide camera, powerful open-ear speakers, and built-in Meta AI that syncs with your Garmin devices for real-time insights while you train. Take your performance to the next level with Oakley Meta Vanguard. Athletic intelligence is here. Learn more on meta.com.
You might think you know what it takes to lead a happier life. More money, a better job, or Instagram-worthy vacations. You might also be dead wrong. Yale professor Dr. Laurie Santos has studied the science of happiness and found many of us do the exact opposite of what will make our lives truly better. On her podcast, The Happiness Lab, she takes you through scientific research and shares some surprising stories that will change the way you think about happiness. To celebrate the start of the NBA season, Utah Jazz player Kevin Love joins Laurie to talk about how he stays calm and collected in a high-pressure work environment, the basketball court. Listen to The Happiness Lab wherever you get your podcasts.
Top of the order for the Blue Jays, George Springer at the plate. Tying run and
On a crisp October night in Seattle, the Toronto Blue Jays found themselves down 3-1 to the Mariners in the seventh inning of a decisive Game 7 of the ALCS. An injured George Springer stepped to the plate and launched a ball into the left field seats, a 3-run shot that turned decades of frustration into an instant of pure joy. The sound of that swing was more than the crack of a bat. It was the sound of a country remembering what victory felt like.
George Springer puts the Blue Jays on top with a huge 3-run homer.
For Canadian baseball fans, this wasn't just about one game or one player. It was about a generation that had probably never seen the Blue Jays reach the World Series. After the glory years of 1992 and 93, the team wandered, rebuilding, retooling, making playoff runs in 2015 and 2016, only to fall short. The wait for the World Series became part of their story. And so, when Springer's homer cleared the wall, it wasn't just Toronto celebrating. There were people in Vancouver, there was Halifax, there was even Montreal, which once had its own major league dreams. It was Canada reestablishing its place in a sport that usually belongs to its neighbors to the south. And that's where today's conversation begins. Hey everyone, it's Kavitha Davidson, and welcome to another episode of Sportly. Each week we discuss lesser-known sports history, iconic events, notable athletes, and impactful moments on and off the field. Moments that, all too often, fall to the sidelines of history. Today I'm joined by Zach Vanasse, a native Canadian who grew up an Expos fan outside of Montreal and has now lived in Toronto for 15 years and thus adopted the Blue Jays as his team. I wanted to ask him how Canadians are feeling about the Jays being back in the World Series for the first time in 32 years, how jilted Expos fans have or haven't come around to rooting for quote-unquote Canada's team, and how everything seems to come full circle with the last name Guerrero.
For the first time in 32 years, the Toronto Blue Jays are going to the World Series. What a performance by Jeff Hoffman.
So, Zach, thank you for joining us. First of all, how does it feel in Toronto right now with the Blue Jays back in the World Series for the first time in 32 years?
It's pretty electric. It really is. The city's rallied around these Blue Jays all year long, and people had a lot of fun with the team, the run into first place, but I'm not sure at any point along the way there was full buy-in that this was a World Series team, and here we are. You know, all of a sudden the George Springer dinger happens, and we're headed to the World Series for the first time in 32 years. So it's very electric. It was so exciting after Game 7. You know, people are already celebrating in the streets just for having won the pennant, and now we're off to the World Series.
I'm a Yankees fan, so obviously I've the Blue Jays.
I'd apologize to you, but nah.
No, we never deserve apologies. It's fine. I would say maybe after Game 5 of the World Series last year, I think that that might be one that, hug a Yankees fan. But obviously, so I've been following the Blue Jays as an AL East rival this entire season. Mm-hmm. When in the season do you think, or maybe when in the postseason run, do you think Blue Jays fans started to feel like this could be a team that won a title?
I don't know about the team that won the title after George Springer's home run. Like, maybe we can beat the Dodgers. But when we thought this team was for real and, was definitely going to be a team to be messed with in the playoffs and maybe we can do some damage, that was when we swept the Yankees in 4 games back in July. From then on, the momentum really felt like this is a team, maybe not a team of destiny, but a team that has some juice. It's not normal for the Toronto Blue Jays to sweep the New York Yankees, especially not in 4 games and not the way that series went down. So that July series really, I think, changed things. And then the Yankees came and charged on towards the end of the season, and it came down to the final day to win the AL East. Both teams had to sweep their final series to pull that off. And so things got a little dicey, but I was in the stands for one of the games against the Yankees, the closeout game, and that really felt like the moment of like, oh, we're on to something here. This team's got juice.
There it is! The Toronto Blue Jays have punched their ticket to the championship series, going through the New York Yankees in 4 games. And again,
that was a rough series. I have to say, I also do some work in local radio, so you can imagine that the takes were very measured on WFAN after the Yankees got swept.
This was a big rivalry season for the Yankees and the Blue Jays, which hasn't historically been a huge rivalry by any stretch. I mean, it was the first time those two teams ever met in the playoffs was this year, but it really felt like it was between the Yankees and the Blue Jays this year, this heated rivalry, broadcasters going back and forth, annoying each other. The fan bases like really irritating each other. Beating the Yankees was a big moment where it was like, oh, we've knocked off the New York Yankees. We went into Yankee Stadium and won some games. Like, there's just not something that has really happened for the Blue Jays historically. It never happened in the playoffs. And so, we definitely thought we had a chance against Seattle at that moment too. So it was like, oh man, we've shaken the Yankees, our rivals all season. We had this big back and forth, although the Jays kind of, made their season largely on beating the Yankees. My apologies.
All right.
Not really apologies, but my semi-apologies for that. But, that was really, I think that rivalry fueled a lot of the excitement around the team all season too.
A lot of Americans don't really know very much about baseball in Canada outside of the Blue Jays or even really just culturally how it is. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about this. You are a Canadian. You grew up outside of Montreal, but you've lived in Toronto now for, I think you said 15 years. So you've had kind of both sides of experiencing baseball between the Expos and now the Blue Jays. So first of all, when the Blue Jays are winning, does that resonate throughout Canada?
It resonates throughout most of Canada in the year 2025. Yeah. There's pockets. I mean, I know there's pockets of Seattle Mariners fans in Vancouver. And I know, the history with the Montreal Expos and the Toronto Blue Jays, while they were in completely different leagues from one another, the National League and the American League, before the Expos left in 2004, there was a rivalry there, certainly. They would only ever meet prior to interleague play in 97. They would only ever meet in exhibition games. So it wasn't like an on-the-field rivalry, but there's a huge rivalry between Montreal and Toronto as far as hockey goes, which remains religion, obviously, in Canada. So that fed into it. But I would say most Canadians have got on board with this idea, Canada's team. Certainly the owner of the Toronto Blue Jays, the Rogers Communications Company, loves to make well-known Canada's team. And I think that some people don't love the constant flag waving of Canada's team for a team from Toronto. But, again, if you took a poll right across Canada who's rooting for the Blue Jays, it's got to be 95% of the country. Right.
We will absolutely get into some of that history. But first, the Blue Jays reached their first peak in the 90s under manager Cito Gaston. They had stars like John Olerud and Paul Molitor, Roberto Alomar, Joe Carter, of course. They won back-to-back World Series, the first and only Canadian team to win World Series.
Yeah.
Way back, Blue Jays win it! The Blue Jays are World Series champions as Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run.
I know you weren't in Toronto when they won back-to-back, but I'm sure you have friends and you obviously were in the country. Like, what did it feel like when this team repeated?
I was 8 and 9 years old for the back-to-back world titles in the early 90s.
Those are formative baseball years, man.
I mean, that is hardcore baseball years. And at that time, like, I grew up an hour and a half outside of Montreal. I was a hardcore Montreal Expos fan. It was almost the only thing I cared about in life was the Montreal Expos, which is, if you know the history of the Expos, a sad thing to have the only thing be the only thing that you care about in life be. But all that being said, I absolutely watched the 92 and 93 World Series, was allowed, as an 8 and 9-year-old to stay up and watch it. Joe Carter's home run is momentous in my mind. My favorite player growing up, and that stayed, even though I was an Expos fan, was Roberto Alomar, unfortunately. But, so to say, like, there was no footprint of that 92, 93 team across the country because we had two teams back then. No, Canada will usually, hockey aside, usually rally around anybody from here if we're going up against an American team. It's just the nationalism is going to win out. But 92 and 93, I mean, it seemed like the Toronto Blue Jays were just these unstoppable world beaters. They were putting like 1 million people in the Sky Dome in a season back then, which was a lot. For the early 90s, that was crazy. It remains crazy numbers across a season. And this was on the heels of a late 80s Blue Jays team that had kind of started to get its own attention across Canada because the Expos had remained kind of Canada's team up until then. So in the 80s, the Expos and Blue Jays put up some good teams, and then baseball really was on fire for 92, 93, and into the summer of 1994 as the Montreal Expos were then in first place, and then a strike.
And then the strike.
And then a strike, and, there's a whole documentary on Netflix about that right now.
So who killed the Montreal Expos?
The Expos' death is kind of like a big game of Clue. Lots of motives.
It's very good, actually. And it's funny, this isn't the topic at hand, but if you talk to a fan from any different fan base, they will tell you that their team was going to win the series in 94.
But we were the ones in first place.
For sure, and you were 2-time defending champs, but I'm just saying, like, Yankee fans feel that way. Dodger, everybody kind of does feel that way.
No, it was the Blue Jays were the one team who didn't really they weren't probably going to three-peat at that point. But yeah, no, 92, 93, I mean, I've got my 92 World Champions mug. This was my great aunt who lived in Scarborough after the Jays won the first World Series, just sent all this stuff to the family in Quebec. It was just, Christmas in 1992, 93 was nothing but Blue Jays stuff. Like, it took over. It was huge. And now it's been, now I'm 41 years old, and obviously, the Expos left, and the Blue Jays haven't been any further than the ALCS since then. So this is just huge.
Let's talk about the Expos leaving, because we've got a couple of examples of the heartbreak of that in the continental United States. I was just watching the Knicks home opener with a guy from Seattle. Double the heartbreak on his part. But can you explain to people who haven't followed it or maybe aren't like baseball fans, maybe they're not North American sports fans also, just what it was like when the Expos left Montreal to become the Nationals?
To answer your question right off the top, when the Expos left, it was basically a cough in 2004. It was everything that led up to their demise and the moving to Washington to become the Nationals had taken all the air and enthusiasm out of anything related to the Expos across the previous 20 years. So when they left, it was so inevitable that the stadium wasn't even sold out for the final game or anything like that. It was just like, oh, there go the Expos. They've been going for quite a while now. But there was a time, the 70s, the 80s, the Expos, before the Blue Jays arrived, certainly as a contending team in the mid-80s, the Expos were Canada's team. And more than that, in Quebec, while they were competing with the Montreal Canadiens, who are the New York Yankees of the NHL, for popularity, the Expos had this fun kind of vibe to them that while the Canadiens were this team that was supposed to win all the Stanley Cups and needed to kind of carry the torch for French Quebec culture almost and assert this, like, this is our thing. The Expos were like the fun team, and going to the Olympic Stadium, as much as it was a dump and not a great place to watch a baseball game, the atmosphere at the same time was really fun. I mean, through the early days, you had these live like Oompa bands playing
And Youppi.
And Youppi, who is now the Montreal Canadiens mascot, but just, this odd orange guy who was pretty much outside of the Philly Fanatic, I think, a beloved and hated mascot. And so even if the Expos weren't necessarily a first place team, and they practically never were at any point, and all their superstars would leave, it was really fun to be a fan of the Montreal Expos, and there's a long culture of baseball in Quebec, going back to the days even really before the Montreal Royals, but the Montreal Royals were a minor league team for the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in professional baseball with the Montreal Royals, and that's something that Quebecers, Montrealers, I think Canadians in general take a good deal of pride in that history. So there's a long history of baseball being popular in Quebec, and the Montreal Expos, carried that flag proudly. And then poor economics and poor management eventually led to the demise of the team. We could go deep into the politics of it all. We can go deep into the economics of it all. But Canada in general, Quebec in particular, hit some hard economic times, basically around when some referendums for separation came along. And at that point, a lot of money started leaving Quebec, going to either New York City or, in many cases, Toronto. And so when that all happened, along with a whole bunch of other things, really the economics of keeping a baseball team alive in a city like Montreal just didn't have the corporate money to do it. And then the 1994 strike, which cut down a really, really, really good Montreal Expos team from succeeding. There was a fire sale of the best players right after that. And from that point on, a flirtation here or there with some real ownership, or a flirtation here or there with potentially winning the division or getting a wild card happened. But it was pretty much all downhill from there. And by the end, I started high school in the late 90s. I was still a diehard Expos fan, would wear my Expos cap every day kind of thing, and my t-shirts, and would kind of get made fun of for that. And this is in Quebec. This is an hour and a half outside of Montreal. And it was just like, the Expos, who's still cheering for the Expos? There's more Expos fans in the year 2025 than there were in the year 2004 when they left. That's for sure. People have put some nostalgia to the team and reimagined the relationship with it. But when they left, it was over. It was sadly over.
Tonight, the confirmation. The Expos will move to Washington, D.C., and the final game for the hometown crowd.
Yeah, for anyone interested in more about that, because we are trying to give the Blue Jays their due, because they are in the World Series. But for anybody interested in that, go watch Who Killed the Montreal Expos on Netflix. It's a great dive into this. And then if you're into heartbreaking team leaving with a lot of politics and money finagling, Sonics Gate, about the Sonics leaving Seattle, I think is another one I would recommend.
Absolutely great one too, and I really identified with that one. It's sad. It's sad when a team leaves a market, even if they don't have all the financial support or economic support, or in the case of the Sonics, just got stolen basically. It's really tough. It leaves a cultural hole on a community for sure.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because whenever a team leaves, if there is another team that's nearby, or maybe where that team relocates to or something, there's such divisiveness about whether that new team can really fill that hole. And I do want you to get into the specific politics between Ontario and people in Toronto and the Quebecois. And, I think that a lot of Americans might not understand the dynamics between the two cultures that specifically exist in these places. So first, I'll ask you, have the Blue Jays been able to fill that void for a lot of Expos fans who find themselves teamless?
Yes. To answer it simply, yes, they have, in a big, big way. I can speak for myself. I adopted the Blue Jays when I moved here in 2010 as a huge baseball fan who had lost his team. That just made sense. But there's plenty of people who've never moved to Toronto or Ontario, stayed in Quebec their whole lives, and have adopted the Blue Jays. I saw after Guerrero's grand slam against the Yankees, it was trending on social media, was the French broadcast call of Guerrero's home run. So for a former Expos fan who's, Guerrero Sr. played for the Expos, hearing the Guerrero name in that French broadcast, it was just literally chills. So to quickly answer it, yes, absolutely. In Quebec, across Canada, despite the rest of Canada's feelings about Toronto, especially Quebec's feelings about Toronto and English Canada in general, they have absolutely been able to ignite that. But as I mentioned earlier, there are certainly Expos fans and Quebecers who want nothing to do with the success of Toronto or the Blue Jays in any way.
Yeah. What are the specific resentments that go from those Expos fans who want nothing to do with the Blue Jays and, again, just generally, French Canadians toward Toronto and Ontario?
From a sports side of things, you could trace the easy A-B line. Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs, that's a rivalry. So I'm never going to cheer for a sports team from that town. That's an easy one.
Original Six, huge hockey rivalry. Like the American equivalent would be like the Yankees and the Red Sox. And if there were somehow no Red Sox anymore and they moved to somewhere in New York, no Red Sox fan would ever root for that team. So
no, exactly. So yeah, and so you just can't see yourself pulling for a Toronto team in any way, shape, or form. And then you go back all the way historically. It's a tale of two cities, but a tale of two cultures that are very, very different. You've got your Protestant Ontario English-speaking culture, and you've got your very Catholic French-speaking Quebec culture. And as anyone knows, just the fact that those two things are very different is going to create some rivalries. And that's always been the case. I mean, growing up, before I moved to Toronto, I loathed Toronto. I'd never been to Toronto, but I hated Toronto. That was just, and that mainly, again, stemmed from the hockey thing more than anything else, but not just the hockey thing. There's a lot more to it. It's like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia hate each other. Yes, largely sports-wise, but not entirely for sports purposes. Rivalries just occur between two large cities that kind of end up in this dynamic between each other, and it becomes more pronounced when the cultures are so specifically different. And then there's a whole lot of political stuff that kind of feeds into it, and I think leads to some of those lingering resentments that some Montreal Expos fans might have. And when I say that, it's not necessarily at all anything that the province of Ontario, the people of Ontario or Toronto did at any point, but it's just what happened over time, which is through 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Montreal is the economic center of Canada. All the major corporations have their headquarters in Montreal. You've got the World's Fair, Expo 67. You've got the 1976 Olympics come to Montreal. It is obvious that Montreal is kind of, well, not the official capital, that's Ottawa, is the center of Canada as far as cities go. And what happens is Quebec looks to separate. There's a couple referendums in the 80s, one in the 90s.
Sovereignty first, sovereignty forever.
And with that fear that Quebec might separate from the rest of Canada, a lot of economic power shifts down the 401, which is the highway that connects Toronto to Montreal. And in that economic loss, a lot of money moves from Montreal to Toronto. Toronto, over time, it didn't happen overnight, but over the course of 20, 25 years, Toronto becomes Canada's economic center. Toronto becomes, basically the focus of Canada from both an economic and an attention standpoint. All the major broadcasters, suddenly it becomes apparent that a shift has happened. And so obviously with that, a good amount of animosity comes with that as well. I mean, there was a brain drain, there was a financial drain. It was tough economic times across the board for Canada in late 80s, early 90s. Our dollar against the American dollar just cratered, finishing at like 62 cents, which is also contributed to like the economic woes of the Montreal Expos. Suddenly you're having to pay guys way more than you ever had to, and your income's just not there. And with that also, a lot of the sponsorship deals that used to prop up the Montreal Expos have now shifted to Toronto, with all the banks and everything else having made the move. So there was that. And then I think the nail in the coffin for those Expos fans who are never going to root for the Blue Jays is when the Toronto Blue Jays ownership management decided in 2001, it looked like Major League Baseball might contract two teams, the Minnesota Twins and the Montreal Expos. 28 teams, obviously not the Expos and the Twins, but the other 28 teams all voted to contract those two teams. This included the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, the Blue Jays could have not voted to do that. It wouldn't have changed anything. It would have meant 27 teams voted for it, 3 teams voted against it. It would have been symbolic, but it would have been, I think, a gesture that would have helped the Blue Jays over time.
National solidarity of some kind.
National solidarity. And, the Expos paved the way for the existence of Major League Baseball in Canada and really helped the Toronto Blue Jays come into existence. Not just like sure, they can exist, but really help facilitate that. And so it was really seen as like, yes, it would just be a gesture, but yes, it was all you needed to do was do that gesture. It changed nothing, for what the fates of these two teams would be. Now, contraction never happened. The Minnesota Twins got a new stadium. They've had a lot of success. They beat the Blue Jays in the playoffs very recently. But the Montreal Expos did within 3 years of that contraction vote just up and leave instead. And so I think for friends of mine, for people I know have talked to who still hold that grudge, they will point to that as the moment of like, this is why I can never root for the Blue Jays, because all they had to do was give us that symbolic vote as kind of that national unity, that national pride, as you say, and they didn't do that. And I think that's where, everything else aside, that was the one that felt like it was a bridge too far.
Yeah, it's always interesting when I talk to fans of other teams. The one thing that is universal in specifically baseball fandom is that the grudges and the rivalries and the off-field reasons for liking or hating a team run super deep.
They do. They're very deep.
Sean Bean and Connie Nielsen star in Robin Hood, a timeless legend reimagined, where allegiances are tested and kingdoms hang in the balance. The saga begins with a double episode premiere November 2nd, only on MGM+.
Well, back to the Blue Jays. So, as we said, it's been 32 years since they were last in the World Series. There have been some very fun teams in the last 10 years. Jose Bautista was an absolute star and was bat flipping before it became acceptable in polite society.
It's true. It was the moment.
It was the moment. I mean, not to make light of it. When I was in Toronto a couple months ago, there's a beautiful mural of him bat flipping. And I think a lot of people might forget that became like a racial touchstone in a weird way. You had white baseball players like Ian Kinsler talking about how, we play the game the right way and now we all love bat flipping. It's fun. And, when we didn't have any baseball and we were all watching the KBO, which is a very high level of play, obviously, but, Korean baseball players, they stunt, like they know how to flip a bat.
Oh yeah.
And, and now obviously it's just a thing that we love to see, but really Jose Bautista was the guy who paved that way.
Mm-hmm.
You've said you've been in Toronto for 15 years. This team has been good for at least 10 years, but never, making a deep playoff run threatening good necessarily. Maybe there have been 1 or 2 years there. Maybe 2015 was that year. But what have the last 10 to 15 years of being in Toronto, of watching the Blue Jays play, what has that been like? And then to see this rise here, obviously with this incredibly young crop of kids led by Vladdy Jr.
Yeah, it's been interesting. They were not very good. They were not very bad either, was the thing about the Blue Jays for a long time. They were just the most mediocre franchise you can imagine. And people come from the suburbs. The Dome would be not full by any stretch, full. People have seen what it looks like full on TV the last few weeks, and it's great. But you get 20,000, maybe 25, 30,000 a game. Home opener would be sold out, and the team would be okay. They'd be maybe in even the wild card race for a little while, but it was very 500 baseball. You'd have the occasional folk hero come through, and this is even before I got to Toronto, but like guys like Carlos Delgado and Roy Halladay and like some really good players who had come through, but they weren't breaking through. And the 2015, 2016 teams, they were phenomenal, but severely flawed. So even when they seemed kind of like world beaters, mashing home runs, Jose Bautista and Edwin Encarnacion and up and down the lineup and Josh Donaldson and all this good times. Like, it was fun and exciting, but I still, the thought was this team is also severely flawed. And so it's either been 500 baseball that was good enough to keep the Rogers family happy, I guess, and keep people coming through the turnstiles and keep the broadcast on and people watching, but nothing too exciting. And Alex Anthopoulos, who was a intern with the Montreal Expos and then eventually came to work for the Toronto Blue Jays and was their general manager, he changed the culture a little bit from that 500 baseball team to, well, we want to win. And he's the one who built the Bautista and the Encarnacion teams a little bit. But most importantly, what he did in his time before he was fired was, as somebody who grew up a Montreal Expos fan, in the organization when Vladdy Guerrero Sr. was with the Expos, put $1 million down to sign Vladdy Guerrero Jr. as, I think, a 16-year-old, because baseball has a lot of weird rules that you don't necessarily have to draft everybody if they're born in another country. So in that moment, I was, as a as somebody who had been an Expos fan and a Vladdy Guerrero Jr. obsessive, like, this was like, oh my gosh, this is my permission to be a fan of this team. And the arrival of Vlad and Bo Bichette and at the time Kavin Biggio, who were all sons of major league players, and there's Lourdes Gurriel Jr., that team has a lot of excitement behind it. This is the first time that we're not just like trying to build either through big free agents or hoping to get lucky. This is, we're building the way you're supposed to, with a young team, exciting young players, literally the second generation of baseball players. This is going to be the team. And it felt like that. And it felt like that. We were building towards that, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And then the last couple seasons were just bad. They were bad. The team, there were expectations. And then, even if they made it to the wild card round, they wouldn't win a single game. The bats would be silent. It looked terrible. But people were hating the managing decisions, the general managing decisions, everything. Right up to this season. At the beginning of this season, it looked really dire. The two stars, Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr., neither of them had a contract. We are just coming off a terrible season where we were bottom of the AL East, and nothing looked positive. I went to opening day. The Blue Jays got killed. I was happy to be back in the ballpark. I was like, I know where this season's going, and it is not going anywhere good. I expected we'll deal Bo Bichette by the trade deadline. Vladdy will probably try to talk to, but he'll walk by the end of the season, probably to the New York Yankees or the Boston Red Sox. And this is going to be the second time that I've lost a Guerrero to some American franchise to go have his success there. And it was bleak, but then Vladimir Guerrero signed the $500 million deal.
Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and the Toronto Blue Jays are in agreement on a 14-year, $500 million contract extension pending a physical, sources said.
I got to say, things turned around there. Not to the point that anyone thought we were winning or going to the World Series this year, but there was hope. There was okay, the Blue Jays are going to keep Vladdy. At the very least, we're going to keep Vladdy. And it seemed like maybe everything with the team on the field changed at that point, too. It was, Vladdy's here. We're not giving up. Let's go. And by May, June, and specifically into July, things were really fun. But that was it, just really fun through the summer. But it was the first time that the team in a while was just lovable up and down the lineup, where the guys, your Nathan Lucases, your Ernie Clements, became a guy all of a sudden, whereas at the beginning it seems like, this is our lineup?
Alejandro Kirk and...
Yeah, Kirky become like, Kirky, what a folk hero he is. I mean, you can't design a more perfect folk hero baseball player than Kirky. So at some point, these guys who last year you're looking at the lineup, you're going, what is this? This year, suddenly everybody's a folk hero. Suddenly everybody can do no wrong. And that obviously continued through the playoffs with those, every single person kind of showing up for this team and becoming very lovable right up and down the lineup. It's easy to have certain folk heroes or guys that the team just latches onto when you're bad because you got nothing else. I know this as an Expos fan. I had latched onto some very mediocre players, but this was different. This started to feel like a collective something. And if I had to point to a moment that we went where that changed, it was the Guerrero contract.
I mean, we've got to talk about that, obviously. Everything comes full circle. Everyone by now, I'm sure, has seen the photos of Vladdy Jr. as a child on the sidelines in Montreal.
This makes me so proud.
Just with his hat in his hand. And then the same shot with him now going to the World Series. It's the exact same shot. What always struck me, and I love talking to Expos fans about what it was like growing up with Vlad Sr., what always struck me when Vladdy Jr. was coming up was his batting stance is exactly his dad's. And for those who don't know, Vlad Sr. would swing at pitches in the dirt and still hit him out of the park. This man didn't have a swing that made any sense to anybody.
And you are not exaggerating there. He has done that exact thing.
This man's swing didn't make sense to anybody. He's in the Hall of Fame, but nothing about him seems replicable. And not that he's not his own person, but there is so much of Vlad Guerrero Jr.'s game that looks like his father's.
So there's a moment, I think, when, for those Expos fans who weren't sure if they were going to join the Blue Jays bandwagon, when Guerrero Jr. came along, that kind of changed everything. And that was the Toronto Blue Jays, in an attempt to grow the fan base in Quebec and Major League Baseball in a let's go see if Montreal could be a baseball town again, started putting some preseason games in Montreal at the Olympic Stadium where the Expos played. And for one of them, I think it was 2018, final preseason game of the season before the regular season starts, they call up Vladdy to join the preseason team, spring training team, Vladdy Jr. And he just gets an at-bat in was it extras or the ninth inning, whatever it was, with the game tied, and he hits a walk-off home run at the Olympic Stadium. You know, with the swing that, in my mind, Vladdy Jr. was in an Expos jersey. Obviously he wasn't, but like that's what I picture it in my mind. It just looked so much like his dad doing it. And for those of us who had been there to see his father do it at the Big O, it was just like, oh my God, like, okay, this is the invitation moment for reproducing that. You know, it was just like, he hit this home run in Montreal. It kind of was like, nah, Vlad Guerrero will always, I mean, he was born in Montreal. Yes, he's Dominican, but he was born in Montreal. So Vlad Jr. will always be a Montreal Expo through and through. And if he plays for the Blue Jays, well, it's our one team in Canada. So I guess we're on board now.
This has obviously been, I mean, he's the MVP of the ALCS. This has been an incredible run that you guys have had, as we talked about. George Springer hobbled, goes down in game 5, is questionable for game 6, hits this big Kirk Gibson-like home run in game 7. By the time this episode airs, I think we'll be in game 3 probably, or at least game 2 will have been done. But what are your expectations for this series heading into what feels like an inevitable Dodgers team?
It does. It feels like an inevitable Dodgers win. What they did to the Milwaukee Brewers,
who were the best team in baseball by record.
Absolutely. The Brewers came into Toronto later in the season and just beat the socks off the Blue Jays. Like, it felt like, oh, if we were getting high on the Jays, who were in first place at that time, the moment of like, maybe we can't win the World Series, the Brewers were like a big part of that because they just beat us. They played baseball so well, and the Dodgers just made mincemeat of them. So, it's scary is what it is to face the Dodgers. Like, it just is. I mean, Shohei is superhuman. That's just what it is. He was struggling through these playoffs, but we all know he just played the greatest game any Major League Baseball player has ever played. It was high school stuff. It was ridiculous.
3 home runs, 11 strikeouts. Like, just,
you can't wrap your head around what Shohei did. I mean, Mookie Betts is besides Vladimir Guerrero Jr., like, just my favorite player in baseball to watch. He's fantastic. He's the guy who moved from right field to shortstop and is Gold Glove nominee. They've got Freddie Freeman, who is a pseudo-Canadian hero who plays for Team Canada in World Baseball. Well, he's actually American, but his parents are both Canadian, And that's the difference, I think, between beating the Mariners and beating the Yankees. The Yankees could mash all day, were scary up and down the lineup, but had very serious flaws. And we knew that going in. That was not a perfect baseball team at all, and certainly not a perfect playoff baseball team. That was a flawed team. The Mariners, really solid pitching, supposedly, not against the Blue Jays so much, but really solid pitching, could mash home runs, but the bottom half of their lineup did almost nothing. If you could get past Julio Rodriguez and, Cal Raleigh, then you were kind of probably in a good spot. And that's exactly basically how the Blue Jays wound up winning that in 7 was they, Rodriguez and Raleigh hurt them, and even Polanco, but like the bottom of the lineup just didn't do much. With the Dodgers, there's no safety. There's no safe harbor in that lineup that you can go to at any point, and the Blue Jays managed, despite a very shaky bullpen, and I think it remains quite shaky, to kind of use that bottom of the Mariners lineup to get those crucial outs when they needed, use their kind of shaky bullpen in those moments and put up their best pitchers when they really needed to get those big, well, most of the time, to get those big outs. And there's nowhere to hide against the Dodgers. There's one, you get past Ohtani and Betts and Freeman, and it just doesn't stop. And even their guys whose regular season numbers aren't that good all become these giants in the playoffs.
Teoscar Hernandez just becomes sure.
Teoscar's a beloved here. It's going to be hard to cheer against him. But yeah, he's scary. Everybody's scary. Max Muncy is terrifying in a playoff game. It just doesn't. Kike Hernandez, who is a below replacement player almost in the regular season, is a god in the playoffs. He'll play every position. He'll make these plays. So it's hard to see how you beat the Dodgers, I guess is how I'm going to put this. I think the Blue Jays can do it because they feel a little team of destiny sometimes. When Ernie Clement is batting pretty much 500 for you in the ALCS, there's that feels like that team of destiny feel to it. But the Dodgers are formidable. They are just up and down, and the pitching alone, we haven't faced pitching like that yet. Their starting pitching is ridiculous. So the Blue Jays have a big task in front of them.
Well, you kind of touched on this. Would you say the Blue Jays are at this point Canada's team?
They are definitely Canada's team. And knowing baseball fans, I think they might be America's team a little bit right now because the Dodgers are not beloved.
Nobody is rooting for the Dodgers outside of Southern California.
Exactly. So we're glad. We'll take former Expos fans. We'll take Yankees fans. Anyone who wants to jump on, come on.
The one thing that can bring together Mets fans, Yankees fans, Brewers fans.
No, it really, I mean, it's like the Yankees in the 90s, everybody just wants the big rich team with all the good players to lose. That's how it goes. So no, we know we've got baseball behind us in a big way, but hey, not half the best players in baseball are all on one team and we're about to face them. So.
Right. What are ticket prices like right now? Have you looked?
It's stupid. Yeah, I did look.
I went to the World Series in New York, which you can imagine Dodgers, Yankees, how much those tickets were.
But it's not such a rarity. The World Series happens in New York sometimes.
No, for sure. But that's where I was going. I was like, cost of living and everything being more expensive in New York. Those were wildly expensive tickets. I don't think that they were anywhere near. The cheapest ticket was not anywhere near. I'm seeing $1,700 just to get in the door.
Yeah. Just to get in the door. That's pretty much what it is. It's a couple grand to sit in the 500s, which the Skydome is the cheap seats. I went to games 1 and 2 against the Yankees of the ALDS. That was great. But yeah, the ticket prices for the World Series, I mean, on the resale, well, it's all resale market. There was basically, people got in the Ticketmaster line at 10 a.m. the day after Game 7 and it would say things like, you are 88,000th in line. So they're just, there were every single person, maybe in the country, was trying to get a ticket. And also, this is another story, but Ticketmaster makes it so easy to flip them that people who weren't even interested were trying to get tickets just because there's profit there. So I don't even know. You're seeing all these people show on social media like when the Jays were last in the World Series, tickets were $30 and now they're $5,000. You're like, well, not face value. I think face value is still $200-$300 for a cheap ticket, but that's just not anything anyone had access to.
I managed to pay face value for my World Series tickets last year because I have some friends in the Baseball Writers Association. And I think face value was $5 or $5.50, something like that. But
that's probably where we are too.
Which I definitely did not.
Which is still a lot more than 30.
Well, yes. Also, it's 30 years later. So.
Exactly.
I didn't mean the conversation to go here, but I'm immensely curious because my background is in like sports business. Does Canada have the same kind of ticket regulations that like the UK does? Because we obviously have a huge problem in the States that people have been trying to combat in various ways, where there's like not really any regulation on bots or third-party resellers or things like that, whereas that stuff is very highly regulated in the UK, which means that even the secondary ticket market prices are expensive, but you can still like kind of afford to go to Wimbledon if you have to buy a ticket off of that.
No, Canada exists in the same realm as the US on this one. It is if there is any regulation, it seems like it's not in effect for sure. No, I mean, it's, Ticketmaster rules the market up here just the same. They either flip it on their own thing, or I wasn't going to be able to go to a Game 5 against the Yankees if that had happened, but I had tickets for it. And it was just like, here, we'll send you to our partners, aka a company we own called SeatGeek, and we'll take profits on both sides of that. So we're living in the same capitalist freedom of the resale market. In Canada.
It's a huge problem, and I highly recommend everyone go read June Lee's piece at the New York Times about how sports are just becoming way too expensive for the average fan to be able to enjoy them, because people like you and me should be able to go to the World Series when our team is in it.
One would hope.
Lastly, obviously, if the Blue Jays win the World Series, the city's going to be... It's just going to be a wild week. It's going to be a party. Everyone's going to take off work. Like it's just one of those things. And I will always root for the AL East team, except maybe the Red Sox. But for sure against the Dodgers, I think that everyone would love to see a Blue Jays win. It's also it's a great, like, underdog doesn't feel like the right word necessarily, but compared to the Dodgers.
No, but there's something, certainly.
If the Blue Jays don't win the World Series, what will the feeling in Canada and Toronto be? And what will the legacy of this team be?
Yeah. So like when we beat the Yankees in the ALDS, there was talk of like, specifically from Yankees fans, I would say that like, this is their World Series. They're celebrating it so much because this is the thing. And it didn't feel like that per se, but it was very, we got past the Yankees. We went to Yankee Stadium, won playoff games. That was huge. And it was celebratory. Beating the Mariners, especially after we went down 2-0 at home, then coming back to win it in 7, especially, got to the 7th inning, and that all felt like hope lost. I was like, oh my God, Vladdy was crying. Like, that felt huge. And so this team is not going to be forgotten or seen as a failure no matter what happens against the Dodgers. The Jose Bautista home run led to a loss in the American League Championship Series. As you said, there's murals up. I mean, people play it all the time. They played the whole inning when I was on the big screen when I was at a game, So you don't need to win the World Series in Toronto for a team to kind of inscribe itself in history books. And this team will absolutely be remembered as a darling Blue Jays team, no matter what happens against the Dodgers. You don't want to be the team that, suddenly shows up against I think it was the 98 San Diego Padres who showed up and just got crushed in 4 games by the Yankees. You don't want to be that team, but this team has just brought so much joy to the fan base and brought the whole country on board. They'll be fondly remembered no matter what. The banner of American League champs, it'll fly proudly, and the Springer Dinger and the Guerrero Grand Slam and everything else that happened in between is going to be remembered very, very fondly in Toronto no matter what. This team will be celebrated in 25 years, even if they don't win this World Series. But hey, they'll be celebrated even more if they do. So let's have a parade.
Are we going to see Vlad Sr. throw out a first pitch?
We have to, right? I mean, it'd be ridiculous. The only reason they wouldn't would be, I guess, him saying he doesn't want to. I need it. Yeah. Well, hopefully by the time this airs, we will have seen that happen. Zach, thank you so much for joining me. Let everyone know where they can find you. I know you host a Habs podcast. I used to host a Habs podcast. If Sidney Crosby gets traded to the Montreal Canadiens, my former host and I joke that then we'll come back. The Habs have a fun team, so maybe it'll come back one day. But no, I no longer host a podcast, so this was very fun to get to come into, to be on a podcast again and talking Expos and talking Blue Jays in this run. If you want to follow me, I'm on Blue Sky at Zach Vanas. That's my ZACH for American, ZACHVANASSE.
That's the Quebecois coming out.
And yeah, that's pretty much the one place you can find me. Outside of that, the podcast used to become the Montreal Bias. If you ever want to listen to old Habs podcasts, then you can enjoy that. But no, this was my outlet to come and talk about this. So thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Of course. Well, I'm glad. And we really wanted the perspective of someone who could speak to the overall Canadian tenor about this Blue Jays team. So I'm glad that we could get the Expos side from you and the Blue Jays side from you here. And we'll all be watching the World Series intently for sure. So thanks for joining us, Zach.
Thank you. Let's go Blue Jays.
Thanks for tuning into Sportly. Tune in next week and every week after for a new episode. If you have thoughts or suggestions for a topic you'd like me to cover, I'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to email me at kavitha@immigrantlypod.com. And if you've been enjoying our episodes, leave us a rating or a review on the podcast app of your choice. Sportly is an Immigrantly Media production. This episode was produced by Paroma Chakravarti. Our executive producer is Sadia Khan. Sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week for more Sportly.